Hi guys, my name is Michel with Michel Real Estate. You guys can call me Michael. And in this video, we'll be going through a rental agreement as it is here in Luxembourg. So we'll be going through all the different clauses. And I'm assuming that you are a tenant, a future tenant, or perhaps you are a landlord who is looking into getting some tenants for his property. Well, I'll be going through all the different clauses of a rental agreement here in Luxembourg, and hopefully you will get to know each clause independently and understand them much better than you did before. A rental agreement here in Luxembourg needs to first have, of course, the different parties that are involved within the rental agreement. So what we first list is basically the landlord. The landlord will then be described as the owner of the property. Next up are, of course, his tenants. Now, if you have several tenants, each one needs to be named individually since they will be living in the premises. Once we have described the different parties that will agree on the rental agreement, we will go into the object that is being rented. Here, we will write down the address and, of course, what it actually is. Meaning that if you have a house, you will say that it's a house with so many bedrooms, so many garages, if there's a garden involved, yes or no. And of course the same goes for apartments. Next up is that it's called the destination des lieux, which basically means that the rental property is used for a certain purpose. In most cases, I assume that it will be used for residential purposes, but you can imagine that a commercial property cannot be used for residential purposes, so it is once more stipulated in a rental agreement. Next up comes the duration of the lease agreement or rental agreement. In other words, you will write down when the rental agreement starts. The 1st or the 15th of every month, whichever date comes best to you and your future tenant, and then we will write in it if it's a 1-year renewable, 2-year, or maybe even 3. Industry standard is actually 1-year renewable for residential properties, and for commercial properties we usually use a 369, which means that it's renewable after 3, 6 and 9 years on agreement of both parties. In this particular example here we have a 2-year renewable, which means that for the 2-year period both the landlord and the tenants are blocked in this rental agreement and neither can denounce on getting out of the property or getting another tenant. Next up, of course, is the rent to be paid, loyer. In this section, we will basically describe when the rent will be paid, how much the rent is that is to be paid, and to which account and what the name of the account holder will be. This is basically one of the most important ones, of course, but it is also one that needs to be done so correctly. So most landlords will ask for their future tenants to do a payment par ordre permanent, which means that there's an automatic payment which is done by the bank regularly on the same date. This gives assurance to the landlord and makes it much easier for the tenant to not forget paying the rent. Next up are charges and taxes, in other words, utilities. In charges, which basically come down to everything that a tenant will use during his residency in the property, it will all be charged to him. Of course, there are certain charges which are not meant to be invoiced to a tenant and are solely to the landlord. For instance, if in an apartment building a roof needs to be fixed, this is a structural issue and will have to be paid by the landlord and not the tenant, since the tenant is only using the unit inside and the co-ownership goes to the landlord. Now, charges are really depending upon what size the family is, how much they actually want to use in electricity and energy, will they be working from home or not, how many laundries are they going to run per week, maybe even per day. All of this depends. So actually charges are an advance on charges. And at the end of the year, the landlord is due to the tenant an account of all the different expenses that were made in the tenant's name, but were actually advanced by the landlord. So actually charges are never meant to be seen as rent, and rent is never, well, it can include charges, but usually doesn't. There are of course some properties on the market which do an all-inclusive kind of deal, but please pay attention because sometimes the landlord will raise the rent after a year or two stipulating that the charges have gone up and that they have used much more than they anticipated when they first did the rental agreement. However, we are locked in with a rental agreement between landlord and tenant, so actually there's not much that they can do or say. It is still the same as is agreed upon. Of course, we will also start the rental agreement with a état des lieux, which can best be described as a state at entry, which means that once a tenant moves in, there will be a documentation of the entire apartment, all the inventory, if it is furnished, yes or no. All the furniture will be documented as well. There will be pictures taken, and of course all this will serve for once the rental agreement is cancelled by either party. Once you leave the apartment, this document serves to show that either the apartment has been degraded by the tenant or it has been left in the same state. And so we come to the next thing, which is the caution. The caution is actually a warranty. It is actually meant for safety purposes for the landlord. In other words, if there would be any damages to the kitchen, well, then this warranty is to be used at the end for covering costs that are impeded due to mistreatment of the tenant of the properties. The warranty in any cases is also stipulated in the rental agreement shall not be used as rent. I know that in certain countries some tenants leave the property and have stopped paying rent 2 months prior if there is a 2-month guarantee which is still blocked on an account of the landlord. But here in Luxembourg, rent should not ever be confused with warranty and can't be actually. And we will also go through certain clauses which might be included in the conditions of the rental agreement. For instance, here we have a painting clause. Now I know that a lot of you experts are very worried about this, but rest assured the painting clause cannot always be applicable. In other words, the painting clause means the following. If you have painted a wall completely green and another pink, another one red, and everything was delivered to you in white, it should be obvious that you should deliver it once more in white. I know that certain landlords kind of abuse this by always letting the tenants, once they vacate the premises, letting them pay for once more repainting the apartment. But let's all be reasonable and just assume that if someone has lived in an apartment for 1 year and has not damaged any walls or has not repainted them in any kind of colors and is not a heavy smoker in any kind of way, well, in my opinion, then we should not apply this clause because you actually don't have to repaint something that is well painted in the first place. Don't you guys agree? If you don't agree, then just leave a comment down below. If you do agree, leave one as well. Anyways, we have then of course little maintenance. Little maintenance means that anything that has little mechanics which are basically to be upkept by the tenant. So let's talk about something like a sink where we have water going through. Well, all the pipes, they need to be cleaned out from time to time, and you as a tenant need to do that. If there's some calcium deposits, you need to clean that as well. However, if inside the wall there is a pipe which has burst due to whatever cause, then this usually goes on to the landlord. Now here we will go into something that is somewhat insurance related, but to be clear, in a rental agreement we kind of stipulate which costs go to whom. Let's say that for instance an oven breaks down, and the oven breaks down just due to old age, then it is up to the landlord to change this oven. However, if you have children and they have ripped off all the buttons from this oven and broken the window in front of the oven through which you can see, well, now it comes down to you to get a new oven because the damages were not due to old age, it was just to not have been used correctly by the tenants themselves. So all of these are stipulated in the rental agreement as well. Moving on, guys, there is a savoir-vivre, which is especially true when we call it a how to live correctly within the premises. This is usually related to the common areas. So if you are in a flat, in an apartment building, a residence, well, in this case, you have common areas which need to be treated correctly. In other words, let's not put bikes in hallways, which will basically impede people from running out if there would be any fire. We also should never let our laundry linger on the hallway. Garbage should not be put into laundry rooms, and so on and so on. This is basically stipulated as a way of living together within a community of landlords in an apartment building or several tenants in an apartment building. Next up is insurance. So every single tenant needs to take out insurance, but sometimes they don't. So we will always put it in the rental agreement that an insurance needs to be taken out by the tenants and the landlord. The landlord is basically liable for the structure itself, and the tenant is liable for anything inside that structure. So like we just said, if an oven breaks down, whose insurance will cover that? But of course, if there will be any piping that will be burst inside the walls, well, that goes to the landlord. But an insurance needs to be taken out, and please, as a tenant, do so, because the costs, if there would be any water or fire damage due to what you did to the apartment, the cost can be humongous, especially if there's multiple units above you which were damaged due to a fire, or multiple units below you because of a water leakage that is due to you not turning off a shower or some silly thing like that. The cost can be tremendous, and you might actually pay for the rest of your life to cover those costs. That's not what I want for you guys. So make sure to take out that insurance. Usually it also says in the rental agreement that a subletting is not allowed. So if your name is on the rental agreement, like we mentioned before, but you have, due to other reasons, other tenants living in this property, you're not allowed to do so, okay? You can't just bring in more renters into a property. It's not safe, it's not what the landlord wants, and you as a landlord certainly need to put this in your rental agreement if you get any tenants. You never know what kind of plans they have for your property. All right, now we have another little clause which is very interesting. It is the sales clause, or the new renting out clause. So new renting out means that if your tenants find new tenants to take over the lease agreement, that you either agree or don't agree on it. If for any reason you as a landlord wish to sell the house or apartment that you rented out, you are free to do so. You basically will sell the unit with the tenants in place, which then comes down to how will I show this unit or this house to potential buyers. Well, this clause stipulates that you as a tenant will give the apartment up for showings every now and again for the landlord to be able to sell this property correctly. And of course, there is always the agency, well, actually not always, that was actually wrong, but there's always a possibility to have a clause in there where an agency will be paid. We should always put that in there if there is an agency involved, because if there is none so discriminated within the contract, actually the payment is not due. Most agents don't actually know this. Of course, we have also a little clause in it which stipulates that if there is any disagreement and we would have to go to court, that it is actually the Luxembourgish courts who will decide. I'm not sure why we still leave this in there. I think it's still due to certain French people that came over, rented properties, and expected that any kind of laws or any kind of disputes, it would be the French tribunal hearings that will take care of it, but that's not the case. In any ways, if there is a rental agreement which was with a property here in Luxembourg, the Luxembourgish legislation applies. Of course, we then need to also sign that document, sign it on the proper date, which does not have to be the same date as the rental agreement going into effect, but we need to still put a date. It is recommended by law. Actually, it's required by law. Have I forgotten anything? Not really. Okay, guys, it is a short video. It is something that is very, very important for the real estate market here in Luxembourg. So I hope that this video was very informational for you. Should you have any kind of questions, you can always contact me on my WhatsApp. Here's the number. And of course, you can follow me on all the other social media as well. So once again, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next video as well. Again, my name is Michel with Michel Real Estate. You guys can call me Michael. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.